Welcome to the podcast, everyone. I'm here with Jim Cooper, COO and CTO and co-founder of Braid Theory, an accelerator that is focused around the blue economy. Jim, thanks again for joining the podcast.
Thanks, Eric. Appreciate being here very much.
No worries. So, Jim, you have such great expertise in the blue economy, and that's what today's podcast discussion is today. Why don't you explain to us what Braid Theory is? Because I think it has an interesting parallel and intersection with our podcast discussion.
Yeah, sure. So we're a vertically integrated venture advisory focused around commercialization of early stage transformative technologies in the blue economy. The blue economy is generally regarded as all the constituent pieces that belong to all of those sectors that touch the ocean. So, it's a confluence of food and agriculture, energy and water, the ocean itself, fisheries and aquaculture, ports and shipping, logistics, advanced transportation, even aerospace, life sciences, especially things like synthetic biology and biotech. But also enabling technologies, software as a service, IoT, things like that, that allow the transformative capacity of the blue economy.
Interesting. It seems like it's a broad swath that the blue economy covers. In your experience via Braid Theory and what you're seeing down in the greater Los Angeles area, do you think that the blue economy has taken off recently, particularly in the startup ecosystem or in the general economy?
I think in the general economy, I think there's a lot more scope for what we call blue tech or ocean tech. I think that there are a lot of companies, particularly startups, that are operating within the framework of the blue economy, but without saying that they're part of the blue economy. So, climate technology companies or clean tech, those are often ones that we associate with the blue economy. And sure, they make up a constituent part of the blue economy, particularly things that are around energy and water. But we're not singly focused around just those areas. The blue economy is kind of a multi and cross-disciplinary field, and it's cross and multiple sectors. So if let's take it from an investor perspective. If someone was investing in a company that was doing climate technology, they're likely investing in the blue economy. If they're investing in a company in, say, logistics or goods movement, they're probably investing in a company that works adjacent to the blue economy. So the blue economy touches so many things and affects so many lives that it is. I would like to say that it is the economy. Even things like nearly 50% of our food is grown by aquaculture. Our seafood is grown by aquaculture. So not just finfish, but also shrimp and oysters and other kind of bivalves and stuff. There's a burgeoning area around kelp and kelp farming and all the capacity and the capabilities that kelp has to offer, including value-added food ingredients, biofuels, and even there's one species of kelp, Asparagopsis, which can be used to prevent cows from burping and giving off methane. So there's a range of things that are happening within the blue economy, which of course derives a lot of its kind of pedigree from land-based technologies. So agricultural, ag tech, energy that's derived from offshore wind is essentially the wind-powered turbines that you have on land, but they're sitting offshore. So, those are the kinds of things that I think are important parts, placeholders, if you like, for how the blue economy works.
It's interesting that you're talking about intersectionality, and I'm giving a great description about how the blue economy encompasses like a variety of industry verticals, and if you think about a variety of companies and individuals. Why do you think recently there's been such an interest in the blue economy? Is it more sociological change? Is it education? Is it just people are starting to understand, hey, it's not just, I can't just focus on my narrow lane in industry. I have to take a look at the holistic perspective.
I think there's a couple of answers to that. One is obviously from an investment point of view, there's a greenfield aspect to it, right? That these are kind of uncharted waters. Sorry, pardon the pun. These are uncharted waters. We have a potential to invest a lot and get quite a bit of return. So obviously that's the kind of the greenfield aspect of it. There's also, from a startup perspective, there's a blue sky aspect to it too, right? Though can create something, it can invent an idea, and it can be part of the blue economy. The sky's the limit, right? And I think that's driven an interest in creating startups that solve immediate issues, immediate problems, right? So some of those immediate problems have become popular in the press. And so that's the third thing that I think would be a driver. Certainly things like energy and energy resources, the microplastics or plastics in general in the ocean, and also sea level rise and climate change in general has kind of driven this this need or a want for something to take place around ocean technology. We also have a protein gap right now, where we're probably not getting enough proteins in our diet, at least on an average over the world. Probably in some communities in the United States are probably eating more protein than they need, but and are we getting enough of the right kinds of proteins? And so I think there's the opportunity for people to look at the ocean as a source for exploiting protein. And while we're there, maybe exploiting, and I don't mean exploiting in a negative sense, I mean exploitation in a positive sense. Utilizing, if you like, aspects of ocean cultivation or ocean mining that can allow us to do, and I don't mean mining in just like digging up stuff. I mean, mining could be, right now we can mine salts, ocean salts, for a range of different chemicals. And I think that's both compounds and elements that we can then use for other processes. So I think that there's a really, and I think we're only really discovering there's a really broad way in which we can tap into that. And then I think the final thing is that the cost of creating a startup has come down so drastically that we can build this kind of agglomerated economy around the blue economy, right? So it's cheaper to do the things around the ocean now than what it ever has been. There are clear needs to solve problems around supply chain and logistics and optimize that. So these are kinds of big impact things that we can make a difference on. And I think that is the kind of the final component that's really driving the way that the blue economy is being shaped.
There's a lot to unpack in what you just said. Let's start with the startups. It's kind of interesting you brought up, the variety that they could do. I know that there's a startup, I can't remember what it's called. I think the Ocean Cleanup that's cleaning up the Pacific garbage patch as an example. Yeah. But you kind of emphasize that the startups, we're in a phase where it's, I don't know if you would use the word cheaper to start up a startup now, or maybe easier. Why do you think that is? Is it a bit of technology? Is it a bit of change of mindset? All of the above?
I think a little bit of both. I think because ocean technologies, blue tech requires a lot of hardware, needs sensors to monitor things, that there's you can't build too much software at the back end in order to solve the problems that only a handful of sensors are going to be doing, right? So there's a kind of a limit, kind of a Moore's law of the kinds of component software that you can put onto a range of number of whatever IoT sensors in order to drive some kind of particular solution, whether it's for aquaculture and detecting algae blooms or whatever it might be, right? Near shore ocean observing for, rogue waves or whatever it might be. So, but I think that there's an aspect where we can, so as the cost of creating hardware comes down, we then have an ability to utilize that in a way that we can customize with software that has say a recurring revenue model, right? And I think that's helpful in the discussions as well we've had with startups. These talks about where a need is for an unfair advantage, and so I think that because of how regulated the oceans are, and they're only going to become more regulated, that applying those things to an unfair advantage will certainly be able to breed some kind of competitive nature within the ecosystem, then producing more startups. I mean, so the theory goes, right, that then it will produce more startups that enter into competition with one another, that then kind of coalesce into, the 5 or 6, high value startups that are kind of, if we could have our version of unicorns, right, that would be them, that would be doing and solving those problems that are unique to that ocean environment. And so I think that's part of it. I think the other part of why startups have got these opportunities now, I think, is there's more awareness about how important the ocean is, and that they are now looking actively at those solutions. They're looking at those problems and trying to find solutions that mitigate things like climate change or sea level rise or whatever it might be. Loss of fisheries, loss of habitat. We still haven't mapped most of the ocean, so that's a big challenge. And we're finding that a lot of little startups are in an aggregated kind of a way, a lot of startups are filling the gaps where otherwise we would probably have no solution.
Interesting. I'm going to probe one comment you made, which was regards to hardware and the cost coming down. So I take it then from your comments that you see that the recent chip shortage that we've all been encountering, half due to, of course, supply chain issues, it's an interim blip over the long term, so that overall you see hardware continuing to come down in terms of cost. Would that be a fair statement?
I think so, and I think too that as a lot of the startups are using are mashing together off the shelf components that have traditionally been used anyway, or they're fashioning something through their own proprietary methods. They've got they create a prototype. Maybe they use something like an Arduino or a Raspberry Pi. Iron out any of the issues. Figure out how they're going to make an app to drive that. Figure out how to turn that app into something like a software as a service, and then kind of come back to the hardware later, knowing that they've still got this software component that they can monetize. So I think there's a bit of there's a lot of companies not that necessarily want to be soup to nuts, but they certainly want to create a solution that's kind of more holistic, serves a particular kind of a purpose, where there is a competitive advantage, where there is an unfair advantage. And I think that the ocean provides that opportunity, whereas ag tech probably doesn't do that at the moment. And if it's just about, I don't think it's just about chip shortages, which will ultimately we can solve those problems and we'll finally get the chips that we need. I think there are other drivers that may create kind of a price expectation that's probably higher than more recent, what we've seen more recently, before there was a chip shortage, before COVID. But you know, I'm optimistic, because most of those chip shortages are driven by supply chain issues, and if we solve those supply chain issues in an efficient way around things like software, then the chips will flow. And when the chips flow, then we'll be making more sensors, and we'll be doing all of those things that we need for those startups to build that hardware. So I'm optimistic.
Interesting, and I'm inclined to agree with you. Let's flip from the startups to the investor side. I mean, you've seen a lot of startups. You've advised a lot of startups, particularly in the blue economy. And you know, what would be some of your recommendations to a potential investor in terms of what to look for in a blue economy startup? And I know that covers a broad range, but you know, some general ideas.
Yeah. So we're seeing about 430% increase in investments in the blue economy year on year since about 2016, which is incredible growth. Probably one of the highest areas of growth that we've seen. Not as much, you know, capital intensity as say pharmaceuticals or other aspects of you know, climate and clean tech. But we're getting there. I think that investors have started to see some of the issues and turn that into opportunity. That's a good thing. I think that there's certainly scalability within the blue economy because it's so broad and so big. And I think that we're seeing more investment dollars coming, R&D investment dollars coming from governments around the world. The EU has spent a lot of money in the blue economy. The United States is ramping up theirs. Australia and Canada have ramped up their blue economy funds and grants and credits. And also China and India has as well. So we're seeing a lot more of this. There's also some blue economy hubs around the world. So we do see a lot of activity. You know, they're centered around what aspect of the blue economy those particular regions are good at. So there's that regionality aspect to it. Obviously, Singapore is big on shipping, but Norway is big on aquaculture. So, you know, it depends on what aspect of the blue economy that you're talking about. And honestly, there is also the proximity to certain kinds of problems and conditions, right? So South Florida, for example, is a hub for coral restoration, and so is Queensland in Australia. That's where the concentration of startups that are working on coral restoration, that's where they are. Shipping is centered around, you know, Rotterdam and Singapore and our location here in Los Angeles as well, between, you know, the two ports here in Southern California, big ports here in Southern California. So we are seeing that there is. So I think that's allowing other investors to come in and, you know, see ahead. In Boston have got the Blue Angels group. There's a lot of interest in what's happening up at Pacific Northwest National Lab and what's happening over at Maritime Blue in Washington State. So we've got a few of these clusters that are attracting the attention of investors. And I think that investors are starting to see, well, you know, I've got some, you know, they want to maybe prioritize how they're category managing their portfolio. So they want to kind of look at certain kinds of startups and diversify within that portfolio. And I think that having these hubs and having them specialized regionally, I think is important as well. So that's an aspect that's driving the investment community. I also think that driving the investment community is a lot more impact investors who want to make changes around around the climate or species loss. Those are the kinds of things that I think they want to make impact. But these days, if you're investing in blue economy, I think you're going to be making impact anyway, whether you say you're an impact investor or whether you're saying you're a regular investor and non-impact investor. Yeah.
Mm. It's interesting. I mean, those are fascinating things to consider from an investor perspective. Would you say that some of the due diligence that investors have to do on blue economy startups, are there special factors for blue economy startups, or is it just generally the same as with any other type of startup?
So I would generally say that no, there's no difference, and I think most investors would probably push back on that idea. I mean, I'm just guessing, but I think they might. I think that some investors want different things, but for the most part, they're probably already investing in some aspect of the blue economy and they just don't know it.
Mm-hmm. That makes a lot of sense.
And so my belief is that we're just creating good companies. Mm-hmm. They are, for the most part, investor ready. Although I'm of the school of thought that we raise money for startups based on their stage and give them stage appropriate amounts of money. So I'm pretty stuck on that. And we definitely have identified gaps where there could be more investment rather than where we see some of the bets placed currently. So I think that there's a couple of things from a diligence point of view. I think that there's a lot of. I would like to see more diligence done, particularly on startups that haven't gone to an accelerator with specific domain expertise in the blue economy, because there are certain doors that they can open that say another kind of accelerator probably wouldn't, a general agnostic accelerator probably wouldn't be able to do. Now, that's not to say that those agnostic accelerators, especially if they're venture-backed accelerators, aren't going to provide some kind of value. But I think that there's a vast difference, I believe, in domain experts, or even hiring domain experts, even if a more agnostic tech accelerator kind of coin operated a consultant in the blue economy to advise companies in their portfolio on the blue economy. I think that would be a way better way of doing diligence than approaching it from the perspective that I've got to do some kind of special due diligence.
Interesting. And it actually kind of leads me into my next question. And you kind of hinted at it throughout our discussion. One was on regulation, another is on domain-specific hiring. What do you think are some of the big hurdles that you see, not only in the short term, but maybe even the medium term, let's say 3 to 5 years, for the blue economy, whether it's for the startups or just the overall economy itself, blue economy itself?
Okay. Well, probably the biggest hurdles is climate change, right? Mm-hmm. And within that, there is quite a broad scope as well. I think one of those things is diminishing food supply. I think another one would be use of kelp aquaculture as a means of replacing a number of, and we can optimize kelp for higher saccharides, higher lipids, things like that. So we can get value-added ingredients out of that, and not just our value-added ingredients for food, but value-added ingredients that can, lignin that can be turned into compostable plastics, biofuels. I mean, we can talk all day about the benefits of kelp, but I'm not going to. I also think excuse me, I think that synthetic biology is another area that we see growth in, particularly in the circular economy aspects of that. And then again, circular economy is another area that we see in the blue economy with growth over the next 5 years. I would say that that's probably one of the fastest growing areas of the blue economy. I think offshore energy is another one that's going to grow. Finfish aquaculture, land-based finfish aquaculture, coastal resilience, and coastal resilience is going to be mighty important for insurance companies. So there's a little bit of insurance tech that's in that, and then of course optimizing shipping and decarbonisation of shipping. Those are the two aspects I think that in the shipping side that are going to have the most salience in the coming years, coming half decade.
Interesting. In terms of, I mean, that's a broad swath. Do you think there are certain actors, whether it's startups, NGOs, governments, corporations, is there anything that any of those organizations or any organizations that you're aware of that can do to accelerate the growth of the blue economy, or are things humming along perfectly fine?
Well, I don't want to be critical, but I will say that I think that, and I know that there's a finite pool of money and resources, but I think that governments can do better at supporting R&D, and they don't have to necessarily support R&D with grant dollars. There's lots of in-kind aspects. I mean, just looking at in the United States, they could issue more challenges for teams. They could open up more voucher programs for teams that are investigating the blue economy for a range of things, whether it's for a sponge or a cone shell that's got some cancer therapeutic. The NIH should be creating an avenue to allow that to happen. And if that's kind of an in-kind, here's some lab space, here's some PIs, here's an institute within the NIH that you can use to find and synthesize that particular chemical or that compound that might be useful for a cancer drug. Well, great, yeah. I mean, that's what they should be doing. And they should be targeting that to people in the blue economy who are solving those problems, not just saying, well, because we don't want to be overlooked. I think if they focus some of that energy into looking at the blue economy aspects of say a targeted compound for therapeutics, then they would broaden the amount of potential proposals to their solicitations. So I think that would be a useful tool for government. So that's one aspect. The other aspect I think is venture capital sometimes, especially early stage venture capital, tend to gravitate towards the buzz. And they gravitate towards buzz because typically venture capital doesn't put money into R&D so much as it does for that customer inflection point, the demand inflection point. So there's this period of latency between when something is commercialized, brought from the lab and then commercialized, and then there's a demand for it. So there's this latency period. I want to see more. I want to see more in that latency period. I want to see more investment, stage appropriate investment in that latency period, particularly kind of between angel and seed. That's what I'd like to see on the investment side. Now, on the startup side, I'd certainly like to see more emphasis placed on aspects of how we can grow the blue economy through student entrepreneurship, and that can be supported through government programs as well, like ICOR, which I'm involved in, or other aspects like that. In Canada, it's the Lab to Market program. So there's I think a range of ways in which we can approach this. I think that those are aspects that we can definitely adopt very, very quickly.
That makes a lot of sense. I think we've only touched the surface in terms of the blue economy, but Jim, usually with my podcast, I ask our guests what some final thoughts related to the blue economy and what our listeners should be thinking about as they maybe want to dive deep related to the blue economy. So Jim,
what someone dives into in the blue economy.
Just what they should, any final thoughts related to the blue economy? Is there anything that they should be thinking about if they're interested in learning more?
Well, they should definitely come and see me. They should definitely come and talk to me. Look, I've seen everything from the ideation stage all the way through to, well-funded venture-backed companies that have got plenty of resources and have got revenue, and they're still asking me, is this appropriate? Is this a good idea? Help me with this. I think I need to get a grant to help develop this idea out, or I need to do. I've seen it all. We focus generally on earlier stage companies only because I think that that's a good place for us to shape them into that kind of investigation of the market mode, So I tend to focus on pre-accelerator and accelerator companies. That's not to say that we don't do some consulting work around companies that are doing later stage stuff or growth companies. We do that. But I think what I would tend to want to focus on as a final thought would be for companies that are doing stuff terrestrially, or adjacent, if you like, to the ocean, that they should definitely think about how they can adapt their product or their service, or their if it's a software or if it's a piece of hardware or any other kind of enabling technology, if it's some kind of aspect of science or engineering. I think they should definitely see how that can be applied to the oceans, and definitely consider that as the next horizon for their growth.
Interesting, and we'll definitely include a link in the podcast to Braid Theory so they can get in touch with you, Jim. So, Jim, this has been a fascinating discussion. Thank you again for participating in the podcast.
Thanks, Eric. I appreciate it. Thanks very much.